What if I told you that in just 5 seconds, Oscar Piastri exposed one of the biggest weaknesses of the Mercedes package, while revealing the secret weapon McLaren had been quietly developing for months? Because what happened at the start of the Japanese Grand Prix was not normal. It wasn't just a quick reaction. It wasn't simply a brave move. What we witnessed was a perfectly executed launch in a brand new technical era of Formula One, where most teams are still trying to understand how everything works. While other drivers hesitated, struggling to manage power delivery and traction, Piastri did something almost no one expected. He attacked from the dirty side of the grid, the side that normally offers less grip, overtook 2 rivals in a matter of seconds, and escaped as if he was driving a completely different car. And that is exactly where things start to get worrying for the rest of the grid. Because this wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. McLaren has been quietly working on something extremely specific. Something so effective that even Mercedes is now trying to understand and possibly copy what they've done. The big question is this: are we witnessing the beginning of a new technical advantage that could change the order of Formula One right from the first corner? What we saw at Suzuka was more than just a strong start. It was the first clear sign that something is changing inside Formula One, and that McLaren may have understood this new technical era before anyone else. To understand what Oscar Piastri did, you have to go far beyond those first few seconds. You have to look at the bigger context. In this new generation of Formula One cars, race starts are no longer determined purely by driver reflexes or mechanical grip. They become a precise exercise in energy management. Without the traditional systems teams relied on before, power delivery during those first meters has become incredibly complex. Teams now need to carefully control how energy is deployed from the moment the lights go out. Too aggressive, and traction disappears. Too conservative, and you lose positions instantly. Many teams are still trying to solve this balance. But McLaren had already been working on it for months. It wasn't visible in qualifying. It didn't generate headlines. It wasn't obvious in lap times. But behind the scenes, McLaren engineers were building something extremely focused. The perfect launch system. And when the lights went out in Japan, all that hidden work revealed itself in just a few seconds. Piastri didn't just react well. He executed a launch procedure that looked almost perfectly optimized. Starting from the dirty side, normally a disadvantage, his car delivered stability, traction, and acceleration that simply didn't exist for most of the other cars around him. Within 5 seconds, he had already overtaken 2 rivals and placed himself in the lead fight. But this is where the story becomes even more interesting. Because this wasn't only about the driver, it was about the car. The McLaren has one feature that many people overlooked: a slightly shorter wheelbase compared to several of its rivals. That design gives the car greater agility when changing direction and, more importantly, better responsiveness during the critical moment of initial acceleration. Less inertia, faster response, more efficient traction in those first meters. That combination helped create the launch advantage we saw. But it also explains something else: why Piastri couldn't keep that position for the entire race. Because despite McLaren's advantage at the start, the overall race pace still leaned in favor of the Mercedes package, which continues to deliver stronger long-run performance, tire management, and consistency throughout a stint. Still, the message had already been sent. McLaren doesn't necessarily need the fastest car over an entire race distance. If they can gain positions in the first few seconds, they can completely change the dynamic of the race before it even settles. And that's exactly why what happened in Japan triggered alarm bells inside the paddock, especially at Mercedes. Yes, Mercedes ultimately won the race, proving once again that they still possess one of the most complete packages in Formula One. Their pace, tire control, and long-run stability remain extremely strong. But there was one uncomfortable detail they couldn't ignore. During the first seconds of the race, they were vulnerable. And in modern Formula One, losing positions at the start can define everything that follows. What McLaren demonstrated wasn't just aggressive driving, it was pure technical efficiency. While Mercedes excels in clean air and long stints, the opening phase of the race, the launch itself, may be an area where they are not currently the strongest. And in a championship this tight, even a small weakness can become a serious problem. When engineers began analyzing the data, it became clear that Piastri's launch was not something easily replicated. It wasn't just reaction time. It wasn't just setup. It was a combination of car architecture, weight distribution, power delivery calibration, and an extremely precise pre-start preparation process. In other words, it was a complete system, and that's where the real tension begins. Because Mercedes cannot simply redesign their entire car overnight. Their concept favors stability and efficiency at high speeds, fantastic for race pace, but slightly less agile in the initial acceleration phase. That limits how quickly they can respond. Meanwhile, McLaren has discovered something extremely valuable, a way to gain positions exactly when it matters most. If they perfect this system, if they combine their launch advantage with gradual improvements in race pace, then what happened in Japan may not remain a one-off moment. It could become a pattern, and that possibility opens a very dangerous door for the rest of the grid. Because if McLaren continues refining this concept while other teams are still reacting, the competitive balance could start shifting. Japan may have been just the first warning. What makes this situation even more interesting is the mindset behind it. McLaren isn't trying to replicate what Mercedes built. They're doing the opposite. Instead of focusing exclusively on dominating long runs and clean air conditions, McLaren identified a specific moment in the race, the launch phase, where a decisive advantage could be created. And they chose to maximize it. That changes everything about how a race weekend is approached. It's no longer only about qualifying position. It's about having a weapon when the lights go out. It's about reaching the first corner ahead of rivals before tire degradation or race strategy even begins to matter. And that creates a domino effect. Drivers must now rethink how aggressively they defend the first corner. Teams may need to adjust clutch procedures, engine maps, and launch preparation methods. Suddenly, those first few meters become the most critical part of the entire race. And while some teams are only starting to react, McLaren already has this philosophy integrated into their system. At that point, the advantage stops being purely technical and becomes strategic. Because if you know you can gain positions immediately, you can take greater risks in qualifying, experiment with strategy, and pressure rivals from the very first moment of the race. That's what makes this development potentially so dangerous. Because it's not only about what McLaren has already achieved, it's about what it could trigger next. In the end, what we saw at Suzuka may have been more than just a spectacular start. It may have been a signal that McLaren has discovered a different path to winning in this new era of Formula One. For years, the focus was clear: race pace, tire degradation, and strategy. But now another decisive factor may be emerging: the first seconds of the race. And in those seconds, Oscar Piastri showed that real advantages can be built before the race has even truly begun. Mercedes may still hold the reference in overall race pace, but McLaren has opened a crack. And if that crack grows, if their launch advantage becomes consistent and their race pace continues to improve, then the conversation will no longer be about surprises. It will be about a new contender for dominance. Which leads to one final question. What if what we saw in Japan wasn't McLaren's limit, but only the beginning?